Thank you for joining us today for another Did You Know webinar from Oasis Sales and Trilogic. Today's topic is going to be VX 2.3 and the new functionality that was added in this version. A couple things up front here. The teams that you're working with from Mentor Graphics in the United States are Oasis Sales, which is the entire Midwest, and Trilogic, which is on the East Coast. There's also another reseller on the West Coast. We are exclusive resellers for Mentor Graphics. So if you live in one of these states, please go to our websites, oasissales.com or trilogic.com, and get more information and who to contact. All right. We have several webinars. We've been doing these for about a year and a half now, 2 years. So there's many of our webinars have been recorded and placed on our website. But if you want to see more that are coming up, you can go to oasissales.com, click on events, and you'll see the webinars that are coming up for May, June, July, and August. In fact, our next one for the Did You Know series is going to be now included in PADS is MCAD Collaboration, which I'm going to touch on briefly here today. In this presentation, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail and show it. This next webinar will be actually going in and showing the collaboration capabilities between PADS and mechanical CAD tools. We record all of our webinars, so if you would like to rewatch anything that we've done in the past, you can go to our YouTube channel and go to playlists, and you'll see a link there for webinars that we've done, and you can watch those there. Okay. Webinar today, which is VX 2.3 and the new capabilities that were added in this tool to help make your development better in the future. So the first things I'm going to go over is I'll go over schematic related items that were added in this version. As if many of you are using version 2.3, you would have seen a new function added into the tool, or 2.2, sorry. You would have seen a new function added into the tool called display control. This dialog box and its capabilities are actually coming over from the Expedition application or PADS Professional, and they're just putting it in DX Designer or PADS Designer now and Expedition Designer so that you can have more control easily over visible items in your design, so that you're not having to go into a settings dialog box. To do things, you can have it as a snap-in window in your displays. They added some ruler capability, just like in PowerPoint or some of those tools. You can have a ruler on your screen now to help out with better alignments or things of that nature. Pin type arrows for hierarchical block views have been added. Again, I don't know if many people play with this, but PADS designers always had the capability to show pin type arrows to let you know if the signal is coming in or out based on the pin type that you've set on that symbol. So in order for it to work, you must set the pin type on the symbol, but the tool can show you if this is an input and output pin just by turning this on and off. Selection highlight, we'll talk about that one here. They've added the capability now to support different characters for putting the not bar over the top of net names, and then there's some cool cross-probing stuff that was added as well. That I'll mention here. So let me go into DX Designer and I'll show a couple of these functions for you. All right, so the display control is just an add-in window here. I've moved it over here in this case. You can go to the view menu and turn display control on right here. Up at the top, there's a button on one of the toolbars. I always forget where it is. There it is right there. This toolbar with data book and footprint view and open the navigator also has that new button. Display control, typically by default it ends up over here on your right, but like I said, I've docked it in here. For those that don't know how to dock stuff, I can drag this off, have it sitting out here. I can dock it over there using the little dock windows, but to dock something on top of one another, you just, that icon that shows up, just place it in the middle and it will dock it on top of that item. So one of the things they talked about was pin type arrows. I do have a schematic sheet with hierarchical blocks on it. Let's go here. And I can zoom in on this block, go back here and turn pin type arrows on. and tell it to show hierarchical blocks only. So if I had pin type information on this hierarchical block, instead of seeing pin type arrows on all my parts, like these on-page off connectors had them, if I turn that off, you'll see them there, I can have it only show up on hierarchical blocks. So I usually am not one to have that feature turned on, but some people do like it. Many of the other ones here you can look at and see if any of those are appropriate or you would like to use. The rulers is one, again, that was a new function. You can open up the ruler so it can help you align stuff on your pages. I'll go ahead and turn that one off. Actually, I'll leave that one on. Leader line, color by net. Come down here a little bit further towards the bottom in the cross-probing and selection highlight portion of this. So what the cross-probing one does is you have zoom controls now. So that's cross-probing with the navigator window that's available here. So if I click on a symbol on a page, if I double-click on it, it will go to that symbol, but that zooming control is determined here. So if I turn off zoom fit and I happen to be zoom fold on my screen, when I go double click on one of those parts, it just highlights it instead of actually zooming in on it. Using the display control function for zoom fit, you'll notice earlier when I double clicked on that, it will actually zoom in to that item and fit it on the screen. There's also zoom to pin. There's also a zoom ratio that they've added now. So by default, the tool always just zoomed in to the minimum, which is what I have it set to right now. If I move the slider bar here all the way over to the right and go back zoom full, when I double click on one of these now, you'll see it didn't quite zoom in all the way. So that ratio helps control how much zoom level you get when you double click on an item, which is kind of a welcome feature. Not many tools have that function to control that. It's usually all hard coded in. So the other thing that you're seeing here in this is the dim control. You notice if that part is selected, or if I click on this part down here, everything else is kind of dimmed out on the screen. That is controlled by this dim mode function. So if I can actually control this on the fly. So if you see, if I go down to minimum, everything disappears, and I can change the visibility of that item as I change or move the scroll bar. So again, that's just a feature to help you highlight an item on the screen very easily by, if I go to another page in my schematic that is, let's say, zoomed full, and I'm in the navigator, and I choose a symbol just by clicking on it, I can very quickly see now, oh, that part's right there, instead of, kind of being lost with everything else being bright. I know that. And the same goes with net names. If I come down here and click on a net name, you'll see it'll highlight that net name, and I can see those net names now much easier than I could before without the highlight feature. So again, try to take advantage of that function. All right, so that's some of the new function that was added with the display control capability. Oh, actually, one other thing I missed there was the highlight color. Let me show that one again. So when I zoom in here on a component or anywhere in the design, you'll notice as I move my cursor over something, it's highlighting that item. You can set that in the display control right here with dynamic highlight. And also when I click on the item, right, so it just lets you know exactly what you're going to be picking when you move your cursor over that item. All right, let's move on to the next one here, improvements in pin mapping dialog. This is for if you're replacing symbols. So if you have a part on the board and you want to replace that part with something new that doesn't necessarily have the exact same pin number assignments, pin compatible part, but the part's just going to have different pin assignments. This dialog box you can have pop up and you can remap the pins from one symbol to another symbol. You can also remap properties associated with that. So just to kind of highlight that one here, let me go to my last little demo page here. So if I click on this part and do a right click, replace component or part, I get this dialog box over here. Just to show example, I'm just actually going to replace this with itself. Down here at the bottom, in the advanced section, there's pin mapping and property mapping that was added. If I click on pin mapping now, I can see the different pin maps of both the components. And then over here on the right, I can choose, is the pin mapping going to happen via pin numbering, or is it going to be done via pin labeling? So this is just to help control some of that. And if I go into properties, here we can make this window bigger. You can see this a little bit better. But I can control how the properties from the library are going to map over onto this part. I can choose library only, which in case my library doesn't have anything in it, because I use DX Databook to pull all my attributes in, so that would not be a good choice. Schematic wins, meaning I'm going to replace this part, but everything that's on that part already will be maintained on that part. Or I can, again, do library wins. So again, this is a way to help control which properties get mapped over, and you can choose them individually on the fly as well. So each individual property you could set as to, you know, who's going to override what on your design. So again, we're trying to assist with replacing components and mapping new information over. I'll go ahead and close out of that. So that's just a quick example of the the replace function here was added in 2.2, but this pin mapping and properties portion was enhanced with 2.3 to make it easier. This new search functionality was added a couple releases ago. It dramatically reduces the amount of time and allows you to find information quicker in your design. But they've added some more capability to this. This will continue to obviously be enhanced over time. If you're not using it, I highly recommend that you use this function. You can leave it open all the time, like if you're using DX Databook, and just have it, you know, tabbed over top of each other. But they've added things like column chooser, hiding groups or hiding the group bar, preventing selections of unsupported data sources have been added into the interface here. So if we go back to PADS or PADS Designer, down here I have my search window open. You can activate that by right-click on an item and choose search from the right-click menu, and that will open up this window. Lots of things you can do in here. It comes pre-configured with several tabs. There's design all, design parts, net, symbols, library. You can access the library and pull library parts in here. And then you can look at all your design parts in your design, okay? It just makes it very easy for you to find items in your design. So if I right-click over here, this is the quicker add column function that they've included in the tool instead of coming up here to the, I forgot where it is, I think it's add or remove columns. Instead of coming up to this button now, you can just right-click in the screen and do add columns. And then you can choose any new columns or properties that you want to add. So let's say I wanted to add company part number into my list down here. Okay, by choosing that, it added it. Down here in the end now is company part number, and then I could filter on stuff. So I could just turn on this. I got one part in here that happens to have an item to it. So in any one of these fields, you can choose from a list in order to pick what gets filtered on, or you can type in this field what item gets filtered on. You can also rearrange the columns in here. If for some reason I want to see description or reference designator over here, I can just pull that over, and you can see it's giving you an indicator of where that's going to be dropped and added to customize this window. You can also add new tabs if you want to create your own. You can tell it I want to create a new search based on one of the pre-configured items or just general, and then I can go into obviously add columns, and I could create my own. I just want to use maybe class, let's see, maybe footprint, you know, manufacturer. I can just add my own items in here to create my own view. So again, this greatly helps reduce the time it takes to find items in your design. They used to have the find and replace dialog box or the find dialog box, which I believe they still have. Oh, there's search. I forgot it was under find and replace. Open search there. You can use Control F to do that. But the previous method here of find and replace has pretty much been replaced with this new capability. Down here, if I go back to parts, this actually greatly helps improve the selection capability. So if when I click on the search button here, instead of me having to type something in, again, I can scroll through this list, but they've added Excel style selection functionality. So if I turn off select all, I could turn on just this one item, click OK, and more quickly search for that item. You can click on that item and it will highlight in your screen for you. There's also functions that you can set up for zooming and panning. If I go into settings here, edit settings, and go to properties, cross-probing, you can tell it to enable cross-probing and also zoom on cross-probing. Instead of it just highlighting the part of the page, it will actually take you to that item. All right, they've added some new options in settings to assist with certain things like push block on double click. So what that will do now is if you're doing hierarchical designs, instead of selecting the block and having to right click push or click on the push button on the toolbar, you can now turn on a setting that allows you to do double click push, and I'll show that one here in a second. Disable grid snapping on the fly. This one's actually kind of nice because sometimes when you move properties and items around, you don't want to adhere to the grid. You don't want to have to go change the grid in order to do it. Now you can just hold down the shift key while you're moving something and it will temporarily disable the snap grid, which is kind of a welcome feature. And you can see many of these items that are being added in here are things that you as users have created or defined as things you wanted added into the tool, and Mentor has added those. So these idea items here are all things that came from the Mentor Ideas website. A new zooming function for zooming schematic to the entire design versus just a sheet border and such. So let me show some of these things. Go back to DX Designer or Paths Designer and go into Setup Settings. I come down here to Advanced. There should be, I don't know if they added it down here at the bottom. Push block on double click right here. You can turn that checkbox on, and now when I go into a page that has a hierarchical block like this one here, instead of me having to select that, do right click, push, now I can just simply double click on it and you'll see it will automatically push in and open that page for me. And go back to another one and I can double click on it and it will open that page for me. So it just makes the navigation and the design a little bit faster and getting into those pages. And then like I mentioned before, the snap control function, so if I pick up like a net name or something, you'll see it wants to snap to that grid. And I can't necessarily get it right on that net where I want it. But now you can hold down the shift key while you're dragging that around. Now you can see I can put it exactly anywhere that I choose. I have the alignment markers on, which are kind of nice. So I can still tell if something's lined up or not with an item. By the way, if no one's ever used that function, it is quite handy. It's just right here in the end of the grid toolbar. There's a button there for alignment markers. As soon as I let go of the shift button, it automatically goes back to snapping on grid. All right. Now you did notice there that item, which I guess you'd expect it to do, when I moved it, it automatically snapped itself to the grid. So now I'd have to obviously go reposition that again. Another idea function that was added for people out there that put four-way connections in instead of having to offset the nets. Tool can actually handle this for you automatically. You set this function in the settings dialog box in the advanced section, just where I was before. So now if I go to put together a little test page here, where I can go in and draw some nets in. So if I draw a net in here to this pin or net, and then I come down and draw this one in, and that would normally create a four-way connection, but now when it does that, you'll see it offsets the two nets from each other so that visually on the screen, you know, you're absolutely positive those are connected together. A new feature that you can take advantage of, or you can still do offset net, it's completely up to you, but the tool handles it completely automatically. You just need to turn that function off in the settings advanced. They've added some enhancements to the DXF import capability in Designer. If you were not aware, they added this a couple of revisions ago. This is for handling logo import, but you just go to File, Import, DXF. This can now assist with importing, you know, title blocks or logos or graphic information into your schematics if you want it. If I go ahead, I just created a simple little rectangle DXF here, but if I go ahead and open that file, click OK, full again here, you'll see there it just brought in my DXF in the design, and you'll see it's just line draw items, so I can modify it if I want. I can select the whole thing and move it as a group if I need to, but now it just does a better job of supporting logos that are in your DXF. Those are the major features, new functions that were added into PADS Designer. There's lots of other minor little things that you can look through the release highlights. Let's move on to some library stuff. That when you add a new partition into the central library, whether you're using PADS Flow, Expedition Flow, or even, well, not Expedition Flow, it didn't have this issue, but the PADS Standard Plus Flow or PADS Pro Flow, that when you added a partition, it added it in all three places automatically for you, even though you may not have wanted it. So they've given you now the capability that if I want to create a new partition in the part section, it only adds it in the part section. It will no longer create them in the symbol and decal section, so that you don't have blank partitions sitting there with nothing in them. A drawings tab was added to the partition editor as well, so if you want to move partitions around, they've added a drawings tab for your 2D line drawings that you would place or create for PADS layout. You can't do any of that in the library, it'll always be done in PADS layout, but it lets you see that information via the central library. They've enabled, for those customers out there that have not wanted to replace any of their existing options that they've added onto PADS, like maybe their PADS Auto Router HSD option. As you know, Mentor rolled that into a different bundle that included other items in it, or DFT option that got enrolled into the PADS Advanced option. You can maintain your lower cost support renewal item now with PADS, and it will function properly with version 2.3. So that you, because previously if you had like the DFT option and you were using one of the VX releases, you wouldn't be able to use that license. You'd have to upgrade it to the advanced options bundle that has obviously now been fixed. PADS layout functionality, this is dealing with the constraint editor. So if you're, again, using the integrated flow for the tool, you can enter constraints in the constraint manager. They've now added net class via definition capability. Previously, all classes in the design always defaulted to one global net. Now for each individual class, I can define a different via type. So like in my schematic here, I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of this block real quick. If I open up the constraint manager function from DX here, and I go into my net classes, so here's my net classes. In this design, there's via assignment custom. I now can see what the default is, but I could also come in here and say, okay, for this class, I want to use the BGA via. And so now when you're in PADS layout, it will use that as the default via instead of just the standard one. And I can define any one of these classes differently. So that was a function that was available in Expedition, but for some reason it wasn't available with Pad Standard Plus integrated flow. They fixed that and added it into that. I would say this eliminates the need for entering the constraint manager in order to change things. Changing vias on the fly is all done correctly now. This will be a very welcome enhancement for people that have been using the 3D functionality in PAD's layout. When 3D first came out, it was a little bit difficult to align a footprint with a decal. They've now added snapping and rotation bar capability, so now there's surface mating functionality. So let's give this a try here. So down here in this board, I have a couple parts, or a part that I haven't mapped a 3D model to yet, right? So if I select that item and do edit decal, the decal editor, by the way, is where you do all of your mapping onto your 3D models. You can push those models into the library in integrated flow, but you have to do the mapping via PAD's layout. So here's just in a generic model. You can see there's the footprint, and it's just got the regular block item sitting on top of it. So now if I choose that part and do import, I can go search for the step model that I may have downloaded for that item. Click import. Now that's the way this part was built, is it's automatically coming in lined up here. But what I'm going to do is offset this item in a couple directions. Let's say it ended up coming in like this. As you can see, previously I would have had to have gone in here and chosen the axis that I need to rotate on, and then choose an angle, type in the offset numbers, those types of things. Now what I can do in the tools, I can use these rotation handles up here at the top, and I can just rotate the part around in any direction just by clicking on it. So it makes that part a lot easier, getting the rotation part of that component correct. And then I have surface mating capability. So if I rotate it up so I can see the bottom of the pin here, I'll zoom in a little bit. I can click on define seating plane, and the tool will automatically know the top of this pad is obviously where I want it to be, but now I can tell it, well, let's align that on that axis. So I click on define seating plane, and then you'll see it'll highlight the bottom of that pin, or wherever I choose, whatever surface I choose. I want the bottom of the pin in this case. I click that, and it automatically moves it down to be on the same plane as that. But then I can do align the pad center, and then I can click where that's going to go, and then click on the pin I want it to align with, and boom, within a couple clicks, I have now aligned this footprint with my decal. Okay, so no longer do you have to sit here and struggle with choosing values to define the alignment to your footprint. Okay, so again, a very welcome enhancement into all the pads and for the Mentor layout tools. Now that I'm done with that, obviously I can do file exit decal. I can tell it's going to ask me here, do I want to update all parts? I say yes, and then it will show me the layout here once it refreshes the screen for all the 3D parts, and you'll see the new mapping of those decals on that, or those models on those decals. Okay. For those again that are using the integrated flow and want to know how to map your library parts into the central library, once I've added items via a design, there we go. There's our new part, and you'll see it got mapped perfectly with that decal. Up here in the main toolbar, you can do update library, and what this will do is this will let you know if this item is in the library, and in this case mine are not, and if I want to push that item into the central library. I can choose that. I've got different override options, but if I push this item into the central library, now I don't have to worry about mapping this model to this component every time I use it in a design. It will already come across from the library into the design. For those using netless flow, unfortunately, that cannot be done. You have to be using integrated flow to do that. you would have to still come in and map the models per design that you're working on. Just real quick, a little cheater method to get around that. If I go look at this design, here there is a way to share model mapping between designs. So here's a project that I've set up. Here's the folder that all the PCB stuff goes into. There's a 3D folder. Once you start mapping models, that will end up in your project folder. If you go in there, it's got information on that. What you can actually do is you can copy this 3D folder from one design to another, and that's a way to share model mapping information from one design into another. You just keep copying this 3D folder from one design to another. Move on to the next item, MCAD Collaborator. If anyone has installed 2.3 and looked at the release highlights, this was a major enhancement to the tool. Previously, all versions of PADS up until today, you had to buy the MCAD collaboration function to work with PADS layout and MCAD tools, say SolidWorks, Creo, NX, CATIA. You had to buy this option to do this. It is now included in all PADS products for free. This item will be enabled via the 3D window for you to do collaboration with your mechanical engineers. To enable that function, when you're in the 3D view, here at the end is the PADS Collaborator button. If you go ahead and click on that, it will go ahead and open up the collaboration dialog box, and now you can start using this function to do collaboration between MCAD and PCB. This is very much like the purpose of this tool is for doing things like change orders or changes that only affect those items that you want to change. It's not like IDF where it's all or nothing. If I make a change in mechanical and bring in an IDF, it moves everything around, or I have the chance of it moving everything around, not just the item that I've chosen to move. The Collaborator allows you to make like ECO changes between MCAD and PCB. And this is what our webinar next month is going to go into more detail on for those that have not used this feature. I'm going to go into great detail on how all of this works next month. This is the last major item that they've added into PADS. It's dynamic copper pour. This is technology coming down from Expedition. This was actually developed for the Expedition layout tool. It was in PADS Professional and is now in PADS Standard and Standard Plus. This function allows you to not have to worry about flooding your planes ever again. Once you draw them, the tool will automatically fill them. And in the process of them adding this functionality, it's actually fixed numerous defects that have been reported against PADS for some time. And you can see ones that have been voted on, again, by people here in the ideas section to add this capability to the tool. Just to let you know, dynamic copper pour is not available in the PADS layout interface. It is only available in PADS router because that is the interface that Mentor is moving towards for the long term. So you're starting to see more functionality from PADS layout be added to router so that we end up with one interface here in the coming years. So this design here has planes created in it. If I go ahead and click on the router button up here and push this design over into router, as soon as this design opens in router, you're going to see all of the planes automatically appear. And I'm going to really show the benefits of using this function in PADS router. All right, so there you go. As I mentioned, all the planes have automatically been flooded. You can turn this off. You can go into options, and under flooding here, you can turn off or disable dynamic copper healing. Notice they've added some of the flooding options for planes into router now. But the real benefit of this option is the ability to come in here and move stuff around and see how the plane is going to be flooded or morph when I change that item. Okay, So I don't know how many times designers have gone in and go, oh, this doesn't have the right number of thermals, or I didn't want this gap between these vias, I want plane going in there. You had to go move it and reflood it. Now all this is a 100% dynamic. All right. So if I come in here and move this via, you can see it automatically floods and heals the copper, let alone I'm getting trace push and shoving. So I can simply move this via over here and fix that and add a gap in there. This is very useful for doing high-speed design, differential pair routing, so that I don't end up with gaps in my planes. I put in stitching vias for my high-speed differential pairs. I can make sure there's good ground connections in there. I can also see thermals as they move around. So as I move this via around, you can see it's automatically adding thermal and removing thermals on the fly. So again, a very welcome enhancement into the PADS tool flow. And again, very few tools at this price level have this capability in the application. It's going to save you a tremendous amount of time in optimizing your design. Obviously, the other great benefit of this function is if I just come in here and I start adding a trace off this pin here, and I decide to add a via in here, you can see it automatically adds a void in there. If I've added planes on the top layer or any layer where I'm routing traces, as I'm routing a trace on that layer, it will automatically, move the plane and add the voids on that plane layer. So if I go to my VDD layer here where I'm doing that, and I tried drawing a net off here. Actually, my rules are set up not to let me do that. Unfortunately, I can't. But if I could, you would see it automatically, add cutouts in my plane. Okay. Again, this function is only available in PADS router. When I go back over to PADS layout, I can make the plane show up, and all the changes that have occurred in here will occur in PADS layout. Working on moving it back over to the layout tool here. I just need to make them visible. Go ahead and close the 3D stuff here. I gotta wait for it to re-highlight that. But if you just use the modus commands for turning your planes on and off, or just go do a rehatch command, it'll rehatch your plane. But you can see there's the new cutout that was placed in there. Right. So if I can just go to the Pour Manager and say hatch, you get all your plane fill back. Or for those that didn't even know, you can go into your options here, auto hatch design on load. You can just check that box, and then every time you bring the design back into PADS router or layout, it will automatically refill it, so you don't even have to go through that secondary process. Okay. But as you will see here, if I come into this design and I click on this via and I move it, the plane is not automatically going to fix itself in here. I can still come in here and do a flood. I go to Pour Manager. I can still tell it to reflood, and it will obviously fix it. But the real advantage would be if I wanted to move that, just stay over in router and then move it, and it automatically dynamically updates that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on the new VX 2.3 functionality. Hopefully this was useful to you, and we look forward to seeing you next month for our collaboration webinar as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.